Oh, yeah, I remember this scene. It's interesting because our goal was to get them together in the kitchen having an intimate conversation. It's the first conversation where he talks about killing his mother. It's a situation that I now come to call going around the block to get to the house next door. We decided that playing cards, just have them sit there and say, well, what do you want to do? Well, let's play cards. Well, that was a cliche because, just it's kind of a film cliche to have people, you want to give them some business to do. So they have them playing cards so that they have something to do so that they can justify their conversation. But we felt since that was an obvious cliche, we would go around the block to get to the house next door, and we would have them say, what do you want to do? Oh, you want to watch TV? And then they would go into the living room and find out that the TV didn't work and say, oh, I guess, well, since the TV doesn't work, then we might as well play cards. And so then they go into the next room to play cards. When we actually went to cut the scene, it was just what we call shoe leather. It was just a nonsensical device to get them back to where we wanted them in the first place. Why don't we just eat it and put them there and let them play the scene? So that was the purpose of this scene. And it's interesting, there were only 2 looped lines in the whole picture. And one is when they're sitting in the kitchen, she says, you want to play cards? And indeed, what she really said is, you want to watch TV? So we jammed different words in her mouth so that we could cut that scene out. Early in your filmmaking career, sometimes you try too hard not to be obvious. Sometimes the obvious choice is the best one. It is interesting, though, as one goes along in one's career, one learns to identify the scenes that are going to be cut ahead of time. Because you're trying to be so thorough when you've not done it before to make sure that the audience gets every little thing. And often you find that the difference between the page and the screen is, on the printed page, redundancy is a good thing because you have to keep making a point. But when you have live actors inhabiting the roles, redundancy is death in cinema. And it's all shoe leather. It's gone. This is that same scene carried all the way, where Henry gives Otis his philosophy of life after they've killed the prostitutes in the car in the alley.
This is the scene where we show that Henry and Otis were lovers in prison, so it just didn't fit with their characters as they
Well,
are.
when you see it, it's very awkward and it's become silly. With these, again, it becomes these 2 actors, just somehow you don't believe it.
Was that it, or did it cross your mind that, to make them homosexual characters, that would essentially be giving a negative stereotype, or all serial killers have some latent homosexuality?
If it had, somehow informed the story, it may have been kept, but you'll see it. It just doesn't work. I mean, we're very careful to say there is no clear reason why people, oh, it was his mother, oh, it was his child, oh, it was this, oh, his brain was deformed. There's always theories and there's always explanations, but easy explanations we tried very much to avoid, and probably that's also part of it.
Was that one of Pat Hart's discoveries, that shirt?
Oh, that shirt was my favorite piece of wardrobe in the history of my career, yeah. I don't know where she dug that thing up. Who could love Otis?
Yeah, the chemistry's just not there, is it?
Yeah, it's just awkward, and it's not. Again, if you had, like prison sex, you wouldn't want to be looking at it. We were getting ready to shoot the scene. We shot more of those little tableaux than we actually used. And the idea here was it's everywhere. So we had to get golf shoes. And of course, we had no crew and we didn't have golf shoes. So I had to get in my car and run to this store and buy some golf shoes. And I was driving down Ashland Avenue, having scored the golf shoes. And there were these 2 knuckleheads I got into a scrape with in traffic. And they jumped out of the car and I jumped out of the car. And they were driving a car pretty much like a Henry Mobile. I just didn't have time to get in a fight with them. And I remember them telling me that they were police and they were on a mission. Had it been any other time, I probably would have wound up in a fight. But I just didn't have time. And there were 2 of them. There was one of me. So I ate it and said, yes, sir, officers. I'm sorry for any inconvenience. And they obviously weren't police officers. Yeah, it's tough to play dead for a long take like this. You can't breathe, you can't blink, especially with her eyes cocked over like that. The corpse, Mary.
Corpse blink.
It was a fairly chilly day, and this was not a location. We were this was in Wisconsin because we had to go up there to shoot one of the motels right on the border, and somebody had a friend who had had a piece of property, which is where we shot the woman floating in the pond. And this was a farm that belonged to a farmer that we never met or knew. We just said, this looks like a good place. Let's shoot it here. So we just parked the truck. Mary took off her bathrobe. We arranged her in the position. And we were basically stealing the location. And as we finished the shot, we're packing up, putting it back in the truck. All of a sudden, some pickup truck pulls up, and it was the farmer whose property it was, and we didn't know that at the time. So I think we were rather rude. You get the hell out! What do you get out of here? Beat it! We give and like so we packed up, and as we were leaving, we heard police sirens coming, but we managed to skedaddle out of there in time. Now, the interesting thing here is the garbage man, who you won't see except, I think, the legs of, is me.
So how did you decide which tableau you wanted to use and which you didn't?
Just cutting, looking and recutting and looking and recutting. But again, that one, there's not much impact to it. As with the golf course one, it's just not that interesting. The others are much more powerful. And, of course, one bag. There's poor Rick, he's terrified. And those powder charges were packed too powerfully. That's why there was explosions. When a bullet goes into somebody, it doesn't explode outward. Oh, this was this little rig. Unless you have really skilled people, you don't want to put a powder charge on somebody's face. So we had this little plug with a piece of monofilament line, and it was bloody underneath. And you put the gunshot in the soundtrack, and you just pull the wire, and the little plug flies off, and blood comes out, but it just didn't work. But after that scene where he shoots the nice guy, Otis walks over, takes the pistol, and puts it in the guy's hand. And he looks up at Henry, like really pleased with himself, and he says, "Suicide!" He says it just like that. And it was really funny. But it was actually too funny. Oh, God, I forget where this was intended to be used. Quite the fisherman. It's funny because looking at the storyboards recently, I found I was in my storage space looking for, I don't remember what, I think probably sound elements that are missing. And I found the original storyboard, which Frank Coronado did. And I remember seeing this Henry fishing.
Do you recall what the context was at all?
It was just like a transition scene. I forget, the purpose of it, what purpose it served in the story, but obviously the purpose was unnecessary and we cut it out.
And Frank Coronado's this was his first job that he did as a storyboard artist?
I'm not sure. I think so. He also did storyboards for The Borrower and storyboards for Mad Dog and Glory. Now, this is another scene that became overtly funny. The idea of this scene is while Henry and Otis are out murdering somebody, an intruder breaks into the apartment and attempts to rape Becky. And the idea of the scene was the world has gone so mad that even that nobody, even their apartment where two of the vilest murderers are living is not safe from the insanity of the world. So this intruder comes in and attacks Becky, and Henry and Otis happen to walk in, and they beat him up and throw him out the window.
Do you remember which particular murder would have been taking place before they came in?
I think killing the prostitutes. And sitting with Elena for this, and this was all of our first film, and it all becomes so precious to you. The first cut, I think, was like close to 2.5 hours. The released picture is 83 minutes. You just say, oh no, it's so precious, because every frame is precious. I mean, it's your baby. and you don't want to cut anything. Oh, but there was such a great thing where he did something with his nose or blah, 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 or she did a little gesture and it's so great. And it's funny with Elena and I now because I continue to work with her in the ensuing years. With each successive picture, our first cuts get closer and closer because we finally know. We go, how about this scene? Well, you know what? We can cut this scene. And she'll go, oh, yeah, I guess we could. And then we'll go, but let's just leave it in for another few days. And we leave it in for another few days. And then you go, you know what? And now we just look at it and you go, we're going to cut this scene. He goes, yeah, we're going to cut this scene. And it's out. You just experience. You learn what you need to tell the story. You know, and the idea being, you know, they're not on the ground floor. I mean, they tossed him out the window. He had a ways to fall.
And so how did you decide back in these days, in the Henry days, what would come out? I mean, there's a pretty big difference between 2 hours and 20 minutes.
Maybe 83 minutes. Well, it was interesting. The Ali brothers had the rights to the first two Beatles pictures, Hard Day's Night and Help, video rights. Those were two big of their early big successes. And they dealt with the producer, Walter Shenson. And I was going out to L.A., and I had that terrible rough cut of the 2 hour and 30-minute version or whatever. And Waleed said, when you go out to L.A., I'm going to call Walter, and you should go over and visit him and let him critique the picture. And I said, great, you know, this guy's produced the Beatles pictures you know, he's a player. And so it was my first visit to Bel Air, and Walter had a big house in Bel Air. He was a very nice man. And I screened the picture for him in his house, and he looked at me, it was done, and he just looked and he says, yeah, kid, that's pretty good. He says, but it's way too long. You got to be ruthless. Anything that you can cut it. And so I've always remembered Walter's words that you must be ruthless. You know, you find all these things wonderful. The audience wants to see the story.
Was Richard Fire around while you were making the movie, or did he pretty much leave that to you?
He was often came in. There's a fun story about when Michael's out on the street and the lady's walking the dog in the alley. But we were trying to shoot that scene out in the street, and we had no security. We had the camera. We had one HMI light that we borrowed from somebody. That was gang territory at the time. So all of a sudden, we start drawing a crowd. And there was one kid who was, I don't know if he was drunk or drugged up, or he just kept hollering, you know, and putting on this just making a lot of noise and ruining our tracks. And Richard Fire is over trying to do crowd control with this gang. And it's just not Richard's forte, believe me. Fortunately, Michael was there, and he knew a couple of the gang kids from growing up in the neighborhood. So we straightened the whole thing out, and they actually helped us shut the one guy up. But I was just talking to Michael the other day, and he always just said, it's lucky for Richard Fire I was there, or there he would be. Because those were some tough kids. It was funny, I was just in Germany, and I came into the hotel room late, and I turned on the TV. There was Richard Fire speaking German in Poltergeist 3. They had a dubbed version, and Richard played the bad guy in Poltergeist 3. And I just thought, man, am I in a parallel universe? There's Paul Chen again.
Now, when you storyboarded this stuff, it was storyboarded kind of uniquely in that it wasn't done as shots. They were just kind of
frames.
Yeah, they were.
We couldn't afford to pay Frank to do a frame-by-frame storyboard. On The Borrower and Mad Dog and Glory, we did frame-by-frame storyboards. We had more money, but we just wasn't enough money for him to make that many drawings. That's Erzsébet. That's the one he picks up hitchhiking, and this is the aftermath.
Which obviously you didn't need to show because he comes in
right,
with the guitar.
You get it. But it is interesting when I do go back occasionally and see those storyboards, how close things were to those drawings in many ways.
Was that your direction for that?
Tommy is just such a clown. No, that was Tommy all. And again, this was another one of those scenes where on the page it's only a couple of lines. It was meant to be improvised. It was a lot of fun doing this scene, actually, because they're all such goofs.
So what did you tell them at the beginning of the improvisation? Do you remember?
Well, I mean, there were certain key things they had to hit, like her Heilerline saying, you know, as if this was going to be shipped back to wherever she's from. Otis, of course, as always, goes too far, and Henry gets pissed off. But there's also a certain, you know, that even though, I mean, part of this, a subtitle for this movie is Sympathy for the Devil. As horrendous as these characters are, there's a certain innocence, you know. They're nonetheless human beings, however far they've gone astray. Very interesting guy, Michael. After he got out of high school, He actually wound up being a student in a Aikido dojo, where he was like the one that swept the floor and emptied the garbage in order, and he lived there. He was like an adept, I guess would be the term. He actually took up acting in high school to help him with dyslexia, but somewhere along the way he realized it was what he wanted to do, and he went to the Goodman School of Drama at DePaul University, which is probably the top drama school in Chicago, and auditioned and got a scholarship. He certainly was not in a position to afford that school at that time, and studied, took a degree and studied drama, and was actually working in theater, not supporting himself, but was considered himself a working actor, and that was what he was going to do with his life. And had been in a couple, small roles in a couple of movies, and in at least one Andy Davis movie. But he was painting houses to pay the bills. And unbeknownst to him, as we were going into this movie, his wife Margot either was or became pregnant, and she didn't tell him until after we finished shooting, until he came out of character. So his intent was to make his living as an actor, and this picture allowed him to do so. Like I said, I just saw him out in L.A. a month ago, and he's doing great. Now again, we didn't do that. That guy was there. We couldn't afford to hire the whole rig and set it up. And also the city wasn't going to let us put a torch to one of their bridges.
Whereabouts is this, do you remember?
It's down in the Loop somewhere. I'm not exactly sure. And this was just one of those scenes where the street preacher is preaching a sermon which is germane somehow to your story. It's a device that's oft used, and it's probably why we cut it.
It's almost also like the character actually doesn't look too real.
No, he was a good actor. He was again a Chicago theater actor. This is probably Lake Street for the fact that the L tracks are there.
And again, he's acting amongst a bunch of
Yeah,
bunch of real people walking by. Remember where that was going to appear in the movie?
That was somewhere in that initial segment where she's walking through the city, where she goes and comes out of the. I think this is leading up to where she comes out of the underground station, and then there's those two guys talking there, and then she walks, and the woman comes in the leopard skin coat comes out. I think it's taking you to that place. This was kind of a fun scene after they throw the would-be attacker out the window. And again, it's too bad the tracks are missing. Henry sends Otis for some whiskey. Otis, go get some whiskey, so she can have a drink to calm her down. But of course, they don't have any whiskey. So Otis comes back with a beer, which was another one of our dumb jokes.
What sort of dialogue's going on here, do you remember?
Oh, he's trying to calm her down and say the world's a crazy place, and this is where he sends him off for some whiskey. And of course, Otis being Otis, comes back with a beer. There's Michael's reaction, obviously. And Becky will take whatever she can get. And Otis is just happy to have another beer. And this was another one of the tableau. This a guy who just got dumped off with his throat slit. This is, by way of history, this is Pat Hart, the costume designer's husband, Larry.
You sound amazed for such a low-budget movie that you have so many location shots and so many locations in general.
We didn't know any better. That was one part of the beauty of it. We didn't know what we couldn't accomplish. I mean, had we all been a little more experienced, we probably wouldn't have undertaken something so ambitious on such a small budget. And again, the luxury of, everybody basically was working on a flat rate. So we just, in the morning, we say, here's the work we have to do today. And we just worked till it was done, whether it be 8 hours, 12 hours, 14 hours, or 23 hours. It was whatever it took.